Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Business Plus. The top story that we're tracking at this hour is as a part of our ongoing budget coverage. We are discussing today the India startup story. India has emerged as the third largest ecosystem for startups globally, with more than 116,000 DPIIT recognized ventures across the country. Now, this is as per data available on Startup India portal. Since the announcement of Startup India initiative back in 2016, multiple schemes and initiatives have been introduced to boost the growth of India's startups. Yet, in 2023, startup funding winter in India kick-started and startup funding declined to a 5-year low at $7 billion as compared to $25 billion received in the previous year, a nearly 73% decline from funding recorded back in 2022 amid a worsening global macroeconomic environment with a series of geopolitical tensions. As funding winter continues to wreak havoc, startups have now spiraled into a hole. Only 2 companies entered the India Unicorn Club in 2023, and that is Incred and Zepto. It was a bad year for startup by all accounts. Will 2024 be a turnaround year, and how will the budget help? We're discussing that, of course, and joining us is Siddharth Pai, founding partner 314 Capital, Lloyd Mathias, angel investor, also with us. Siddharth, Lloyd, thank you very much for taking time out, gentlemen. I want to come to you first, Siddharth. As a startup founder, what was your sense of how 2023 was? As I briefly mentioned, it was a bad year by all accounts of, funding winter, which sort of kick-started in the end of 2022. It spread through 2023, maybe possibly thawing towards the end of 2023. If you were to sum it up as far as 2023 is concerned, what were your big takeaways in the startup community?
I think 2023 is the year in which all startup founders actually decided to change their paradigm of thinking. Everyone moved away from the move fast, break things kind of model that was prevalent over the entire 2010s. And they've actually gone on to a mode that I actually call reflect and rebuild. 2020 to 2023 is when we've actually seen the near infinite tap of capital end up actually turning off. But investor preferences actually almost change overnight from actually saying move fast, break things, become very large, get a large chunk of the market, forget about the fundamentals of running a business, to suddenly look at your operating cash flows, look at profitability, look to actually become self-sustaining over time. And a number of startups, thankfully, because of the large war chest they raised during the years 2020 and 2021, many of them were able to actually get past this particular chasm and ended up actually delivering the promise of tech, which was to make sure your fixed costs end up actually remaining constant and every incremental rupee of revenue ends up actually going to the bottom line. So we actually seen them become more sustainable businesses, become more lean and agile businesses. And as they enter the year 2024, for that matter, most of them want to end up actually tapping the public markets as of now and end up actually competing against other listed companies on the same footing. No longer looking at unique bespoke metrics or X-adjusted metrics, but the way a traditional investor would actually value a company, they want them to apply the same lens for that matter and to end up actually tapping those particular markets itself. So a lot more maturity, a lot more respect for capital for the same, and a much leaner, hungrier entrepreneurship ecosystem that's actually emerging into this entire year itself.
Okay, a much leaner year and perhaps more work and focus on the bottom line. That is how 2023 was. But Lloyd, coming to you, India was ranked at 4th place in 2022 and 21 among the highest funded geographies globally. It's down to 5th place in 2023. As an angel investor yourself, what is happening here? What exactly are investors looking out for when they invest in a startup today?
Yeah, I think the little drop in ranking is is fairly par for the course. One, because I think over the last 2 years, as Siddharth alluded, I think startups have become slightly more focused on the business aspect, right? Earlier, it was a little cavalier in terms of availability of funding, growth at all costs, without any kind of resemblance to real business objectives. I think that's happened, and therefore the slowdown and having just 2 startups join the Unicorn Club, to my mind, is good. It's a much-needed reality check. And we've seen that, startups that went hell for leather and went berserk, we've seen some of them kind of, come to, a more mature status. Having said which, I think the focus areas, for one, of course, I'm keeping the budget aside. I recognize that this year will be a vote on account, so it'll be more of the same. But even within that, I think certain signaling is important. I think one is the government needs to intervene to look at some kind of very basic governance mechanisms in the startup ecosystem. If you look at some of the startups that went awry in 2023 and a little bit earlier as well, I think a lot of the governance was completely ignored. Right, a lot of venture funding went in terms of fueling growth. Let's just grow and grow fast and grow at the expense of your competition, almost bordering on the bigger fool theory. I think, therefore, maturity in terms of governance is one critical aspect. I think the government needs to look at that aspect. Secondly, last year the government sent a clear signal that they will kind of create a fund and support agriculture-based startups. I think that needs to extend to two other sectors, which is really AI and technology. And together with that, build a little bit of an IP approach so that Indian startups then start walking higher lane towards more intellectual capital as opposed to being, third-party outsourcing kind of mechanisms. So I think driving innovation, making sure that AI is within the gambit should be some of the signals that Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman should send out in this vote of account that's going to happen.
All right, and you covered a lot of ground there, Lloyd. I want to come back to Siddharth at this point. Siddharth, now that we've set the ball rolling, it is going to be a vote on account, but a signaling would be very, very important to set out a path for profitability for startups in India. We have seen a year which was relatively bad, also not just on the account of sky-high valuations that some of these companies were enjoying, which was literally halved towards the end of the year, but clearly a lack of path to profitability, which is what many companies will be looking forward to this year, and that should be the focus area. What, according to you, should the government in fact do at this point in time to help prop up some of these startups?
No, that's actually a fantastic question. I think the first and foremost thing that the government can actually do now is to rationalize the tax rates that exist between listed companies and unlisted companies. Unlisted companies now have to end up dematting their securities as of now. They need to ensure they have similar kind of governance requirements and similar kind of reporting requirements as what listed companies also end up having. And the government wants to introduce laws with the same effect itself. Yet, despite the amount of risks that investors take investing into startups and the uncertainty inherent in the model, they pay 2 times the tax amount as what you would actually pay on the listed market itself, for that matter. So realigning that would end up actually putting a large amount of the capital that's sitting on the fence. Mind you, there's close to about $30 billion of capital dedicated towards India that is yet to be deployed into the country, for that matter. Some of them waiting for the elections to get done. Some of them waiting for the valuations to end up actually just subsiding and actually stabilizing over time. But having that particular tax rate cut or aligning it with the listed market will be a fantastic shot in the arm to get a lot more money in. That's number one. Number two, there are a number of companies who have actually flipped and gone overseas, who do want to actually come back to India, do want to actually list in India, do want to actually end up becoming Indian companies. They may have gone through for a variety of reasons, by investor pressure, ease of doing business. They have countries like Singapore, etc., have a lower capital gains rate, etc. The Indian government should actually create a path for these companies to come back. GIFT IFSC created a report on onshoring Indian innovation. And hopefully, if that thing ends up coming, our larger companies and larger unicorns who have gone overseas can come back and start creating value in India. And the third part, I believe, that's also going to be crucial is to rationalize the angel tax regime that exists in the country. I think the last budget is when the government, unfortunately, decided to extend the angel tax regime to non-residents as well. And close to 85% of the money coming to Indian startups does actually come from overseas sources. And that one particular change has actually caused a number of foreign investors who are looking at Indian startups to take a pause and to actually redecide by how they want to end up allocating money to India without actually running afoul of that particular provision. So I think if these things, even the government gives an indication of this, the money that is sitting on the fence will actually end up coming in. These startups will get a lifeline. And the ability to deliver upon the promise of technology and to end up, and the entire thesis of Startup India can actually end up coming to fruition as well.
All right. And Lloyd, when we talk about government initiatives that government has in fact taken since 2016, some of those initiatives to promote startups include your Fund for Startups, Startup India Seed Fund Scheme, Credit Guarantee Scheme for startups. To what extent have these schemes been actually helpful on ground?
I think largely very positive. I think if you just look at the buzz around startups, what the government has ensured with Startup India, Digital India, with the innovation fund the government per se has set up, has been positive. Also a whole range of incubation centers that states have come up with. But specifically on regulation, I think last year 2 things happened. One was, the the benefit of carry forward on losses from 7 years to 10 years. So in that sense was good. That kind of incentivizes early stage investing, as Siddharth alluded to. Early stage investors take a disproportionate risk, and then to be taxed above the norm is a little unfair. The second point that the government did last year was extending the period of incorporation for income tax benefits to eligible startups just till March 2024. I think this being a vote on account, this has to extend at least till the government presents a regular budget, which I presume is sometime in June or July. So therefore, that part has to be extended. Outside of these two things, I think, in a sense, laying out clear governance norms is something that certainly has to be looked into.
Okay.
Today, a lot of corporate governance structures are built around listed companies and large entities. For startups to comply with them, obviously, is difficult, right? It will take a lot of expenditure, which is not desirable. But outside of that, I think certain basic essentials need to be kept in place in terms of having some independent monitoring, voluntary independent monitoring, not a government-led one, but in the sense of mandating at least one or two external, kind of shareholders, not even shareholders, maybe the equivalent of independent directors in the startup ecosystem. Because one big concern I have and what I've seen is a lot of startups have kind of gone awry, not only on account of their business models, but with a lot of other issues in terms of related party transactions. I mean, a lot of them have been in the news. We know what we're talking about. So I think that's an area that needs focus. And given that this year's budget is going to be more vote on account, I think those things need to be called out from the highest levels.
Absolutely. And, when we talk about startups, we also want to know perhaps what is going to be our focus areas for startup. In the past, we've seen a lot of thrust towards fintech, retail, enterprise applications. What, according to you, will be the top sectors that the government could look at extending a helping hand to? Some would suggest looking at all the trends that have been pouring in for the past many months. AI-related startups, perhaps climate tech startups, those could be some of the focus areas. And let's not forget the strides that India has made, in fact, in space sector. Do you think, Lloyd, that perhaps could be focus areas for the government? That, of course, are the trends that we've been picking on.
Absolutely. I think three areas. I think one, agriculture. I think agriculture needs a lot of innovation. Right, and it's largely in terms of the go-to-market. The fact that you have a discontinuous link between millions of farmers, so to speak, and maybe 3 or 4 large, organized retail chains. I think that intermediary sector is where it can unleash a lot of value, both to the consumer and to the startup community. So I think agriculture will be big. The second really is in terms of, drone technology. I mean, what can be done? One aspect is on the defense end of it, but the other is a lot of other uses that, to my mind right now, India can, in a sense, become one of the global vendors or global suppliers. The third, I think, is a lot of smaller ancillaries, given that the PLI incentives, which have been 4 years old, are slowly going to kick in terms of large manufacturing. I think, therefore, setting up that ecosystem of small manufacturing. So not just startups, which are digital startups, but basically physical startups, the small and medium enterprises that actually support large organizations. I think that's one sector that needs to look into. And the biggest overriding issue is how to make funding easier, right? One is from the, let's say, the angel investing community in a manner of speaking. The other is in terms of organized credit, banks, rural banks, such like. I think right now they are focused on that is next to nil. And given the fact that we've seen an unleashing of entrepreneurship significantly in the last decade, I think that can take us up to the next level.
All right. And before I close this bulletin, Siddharth, you mentioned something very interesting. You said how year on year we are seeing more startups leaving India's shore, going outside, setting up business there. So despite a lot of our tall claims around making it easier for startups in India, we haven't been able to do so much as much as perhaps the Indian startup sector would like the government to do. In light of the fact that this is going to be a year, perhaps a turnaround year for startup community, this is a vote on account, perhaps a full budget will come in later part of this year. Overall, what are your big expectations from the government?
I think the government has actually done a fair bit of work to make the startup year, to make entrepreneurship a lot more conducive for a number of people of late. That's why the people who actually moved in, I would say from 2016 and previously, do actually want to end up coming back as of now. But I think what the government can end up doing as of now is to ensure that global competitiveness remains for startups. For example, if you're a software as a services company, in order for you to end up actually raising bills in USD, it's a nightmare. You need to end up actually giving the invoice in a physical copy, giving it in triplicate, asking for their tax number, writing all this stuff and hand signing it and giving it to them. If you have 1,000 customers from overseas giving you $10 each, your system actually breaks down. The government has to end up looking at that and making that entire process easier. This is revenue generating activity that has a positive effect on India. I think that's number one. Number two, level of approvals that are actually needed for you to end up going through an M&A for that matter, which is a very simple process, an objective process that happen overseas. You need to go to NCLT as now and takes you anywhere between 2 years. And there's no certainty you will end up actually getting that. And if exits are held up that way, no one wants to start a business here if they don't know what the path to exit can actually end up being. We need to end up actually rationalizing their entire piece over there itself.
Absolutely.
I think the third part that comes in as of now is the stability of regulation. Over the last year, we've seen the RBI put out a number of circulars for fintechs that have actually been at odds with the business models that they have. And we've seen large-scale value erosion happen over there itself. Even the recent circular by the RBI preventing banks and regulated NBFCs from investing into funds where they have business with a downstream portfolio company has actually got flutters across the entire ecosystem. So this stability of regulation, for that matter, I think will actually go a long way in convincing people and giving them confidence to end up taking 8 to 10 year bets and 8 to 10 year investments in the country, which is what India needs as of now to end up actually growing. So I think these are the top 3 things that India needs to end up fostering. And if we do that, we can actually become the one of the largest startups nation in the entire world.
All right, and that of course is the endeavor. Siddharth, Lloyd, Mathias, always a pleasure talking to the two of you. Thank you very much for joining in with your inputs on that story. We are of course tracking what Budget 2024 will unveil for Startup India. We're talking about each of these pillars every day to understand what the expectations are and how they can be met and what the current challenges are and how should they be mitigated on News9 Live. Thank you very much for watching.